Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of the Vedic Conversation. We are delighted to be back and sharing with you once again. I'm Derrick Yanford, a Vedic meditation teacher based in New York City, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Anthony Thompson in London and Rory Kinsella in Sydney. In this episode, we're discussing limiting beliefs, how we acquire them, and how we overcome them. As human beings, it is completely natural for our minds to create beliefs that we cannot do something or that we are less than capable. We place limitations on ourselves and on our abilities in a variety of ways, with these beliefs mostly being born out of fear. But this is not the end of the story, as we do not have to become beholden to them. There are ways in which to bypass these limitations, making room to adopt beliefs that serve our best and highest interests, helping us achieve our goals while eradicating the limiting belief altogether. Have a listen to our personal experiences, but make sure to stick around until the end, where we'll offer a practical exercise and how you can apply this knowledge in your daily life. And don't forget, please subscribe to our channel.
So, limiting beliefs. In my family, we are considered not good mathematicians. And when I was a young kid at school, I didn't know that I was a bad mathematician. I didn't know that that was a problem until my father told me that as a family, this was something that we just didn't do well at. And I think what he was trying to do at the time was just kind of relax me and try and appease the stress I was getting into over some homework. And just by being kind, saying, listen, we all suffer from this kind of a problem. But what he unintentionally did was to condition me into thinking that this was beyond me. And so really all the way through my academic career, I struggled with maths. That's my excuse. And it wasn't until I got into business, and then in particular started up my own business, that I realized I just had to get a grip with this, get a grip and get on with it. And I was kind of forced into dealing with filling out spreadsheets, filing tax returns quarterly. And the perverse thing is that I really started to enjoy it. It was something that I was initially a little bit frightened of, a little bit scared. I had some accountants in the background who were quite expensive, but they would check it over if I was getting stuck. But I thought, no, I'm going to do this myself for two reasons. One is that I need to learn how to do it. And secondly, as a businessman, it was going to give me an opportunity to monitor much more closely what was going on, so that I could question particular invoices and say, well, that seems to be too much, or I'm overpaying here. And so it was a very visceral experience of kind of the financial transactions going on in the business. And in a sense, I've never looked back. And so spreadsheets are sort of, one of my favorite things to be playing around with. But I just want to also, if I may, take advantage of this moment just to explain another story, which is an athletic story. I was at a school where we used to row, and I was fortunate to be in a crew that was quite successful. We went to a lot of regattas, a lot of races, and on the whole, we tended to win or come second. And we found ourselves at the end of the season in the finals of the youth national championships, and we were up against the most prestigious English school, which had a huge budget for rowing, fantastic facilities and kit. The boys were huge. They seemed to be much bigger than us. They probably weren't, but we just thought they were. And we were definitely the underdogs. And our coach, who was an amazing guy, he just said, just before we put our boat on the water to go down to the start, he said, look, just go out there and enjoy yourselves. Okay, no pressure. Just enjoy yourselves. You know what to do. Just enjoy the moment. it's a fantastic accomplishment to get here to the finals. So we just went down there and we got going and we dug in and we won. And we were I was at the age of 15, a national champion, which was astonishing. And looking back on it, I'm trying to think why that happened. And it's interesting that that was the year that I learned to meditate. And 5 of my crewmates were also meditators. Now, we had only just got going. So I can't really claim that meditation had something to do with it. But I think I could recognize now as a meditator that tenacity, that desire not to be put off by something, that to dig deep and look inside and recognize that there is something there which we can make use of, and that given the right attention, given the right conditions in the environment, we can make that bloom and we can make it actually succeed and we can turn the whole thing around. So when everybody else is saying you're a failure, it's not going to work, for some people, they just take that at face value and that crushes them. And for other people, it's like, well, that's what you think. Just you wait and see what I can do. That wasn't quite the situation in this rowing race, but he just relaxed us. He was so clever. He just relaxed us. He said, you know what to do. Just go out there and enjoy yourselves. And it was removing that level of expectation, which I think really was the key to it. It was just like, let's be in the moment and, let's just do it. And that was the result.
I didn't know we had a champion rower in our midst.
A past champion rower. My rowing career went downhill pretty fast from there onwards.
Peak at 15.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
No, it's great. I love that idea of when you remove the expectations, you stop getting in the way of yourself, which is
absolutely
100% what happens with our meditation students, as you well know. It's that desire to succeed which ends up preventing them, and it's giving up that need to succeed which lets you succeed, which is so kind of crazy. But I love how you do see it in elite athletes where, and I think we've mentioned this before, but where they say, look, you could win the league in the next game, what are you thinking about? They're like, I'm not thinking about winning the league, I'm thinking about playing football on Saturday, I'm thinking about doing my actual job. So I love how it's without any of the spiritual part of it, it's become one of the aspects of elite success, because they've learned this through however they've learned it. But the more you're thinking about the prize, the more you're going to trip yourself up.
Yeah, I follow motor racing quite a lot, and Lewis Hamilton, who is currently leading the Formula One championship, earlier this year he was in a race where he said that he didn't even know where he was in the race. He thought he was leading. He certainly didn't know how many laps there were left. He was just, as he said, he was in this zone where he and the car were one. And you often hear equestrian competitors talking about that they and the horse are one, but he and the machine were one. And he just said he was just concentrating on what he had to do, but the concentration in a sense evaporated and it was just flow. And I just found that absolutely fascinating. And he hasn't had that experience since as acutely as that. So as far as we know, but like you say, Rory, it's just being in the moment and not thinking about the end result, just committing to now.
Into the process.
So powerful.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think, about this topic in general is the idea, maybe even when we have a particular goal in mind or something, an expectation that we want to achieve, that the mind can create thoughts that make you believe you're less than that. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure, there are people, and us included, that have had ideas of grandeur, but it seems more often the mind tricks us into thinking that we can't have, that we're less than, that somehow that thing is outside of our reach, but somehow maybe, removing the goal, all of the things that we need to accomplish it now are set free because there's no conflict or anything that says you can't be this thing. So just have at it. And there was a coach in the States, I can't think of his name because I'm not a sports fan at all. But from what I understand, he either was in the college realm or maybe professionals, but he won like 11 championships in a row, back to back. And from what his account and his players, they say that he never, ever mentioned winning. It was not in his vocabulary. It was never about winning the game, winning the season, winning the tournament. It had nothing to do with that. It was purely on the skill of playing the game. And I think that's so interesting that they went on and had a streak like that and wondering, oh yeah, how do you put that goal of, oh guys, we have to win, especially when you've created a history of winning. You have to be as good as you were the last time, if that would have made some limiting beliefs. It's all very interesting how that plays out.
Yeah. Derrick, what's your story?
Okay, well, my story, surprise, surprise, has to do with me being a dancer. And in my younger days, as I began my training, I had a passion for the art form, but I was scared to death of getting on stage. And the most prominent thought I had back then was that I didn't really know the material well and that I would suddenly forget the sequence during the performance. And I was petrified of going blank. And I was much too preoccupied with what the audience was thinking about me, more so than being 100% committed to the material and just doing my best. I was deathly afraid of making mistakes. And I held limiting beliefs of my capabilities as a performer. But luckily, I found a workaround. And in our industry, there is a term that I've used with many of my students as I watch them struggle to pick up and maintain choreography. And this is one that I adopted for myself, which is fake it until you make it. And this is with the idea that until you have mastered the tasks at hand, continue to do your very best as if you have already mastered it. And this will help lead you to mastery. But you must believe that mastery lies within you, and this process is part of realizing that. And bringing this into my training made a world of difference. And being on stage and performing is an act, and for dancers, we're often giving the impression that what we are doing is very easy and effortless and enjoyable and kind of our second nature. However, this is often far from the case. And many of the feats that we're performing are actually very difficult and require years of training in order to perfect. And with live performance comes the opportunity for things to go off course. And the reality is sometimes you have to get on stage without having a proper rehearsal, or things can change during the number, such as the wrong music being played, wardrobe malfunction, a sudden injury. And each of these situations requires you to act as though everything is still going according to plan, ultimately giving the audience the illusion that what's being done is all by design. And I've had several situations where this was exactly the case. And one being when I was on the first national tour of Footloose in 1999. I had joined the cast about 6 months into the tour as a replacement for an injured dancer. And there were 4 scenes that I learned only from watching as an audience member. And I never rehearsed them with the cast. And there was another time where I had to replace a dancer who became injured the day before the show, which meant I learned a solo, a duet, a trio, and a group piece the day of the performance and performed it that night. And so after having these experiences and ending, with a sense of accomplishment, because I didn't think that was something that I could do, I began to release myself of the limiting beliefs that I had when I first started, and I began to understand what it meant to be a performer. However, When switching careers to become a full-time Vedic meditation teacher, I found these limiting beliefs making their way back into as my journey began. And I wondered, how would I find 3.5 months worth of time without drawing a paycheck to study in India to complete the certification process, not to mention the thousands of dollars it would cost for the program and the litany of prerequisites that must be completed before departing. But my desire became so strong, like it had when I was a dancer, that I simply gave it over to my higher power and surrendered to the fact that if it was meant for me to go, that nature would create a pathway. And after all, I was a dancer that had overcome this once before. So I began walking around as if all those pieces would drop into place, basically faking it until I was making it, with the belief that it would all work out, which it did. And the interesting thing about that is I know that there is a little bit of controversy around that term. But for me, it was so relevant because you may have had all the rehearsals you've ever needed, and for whatever reason, you just cannot remember anymore. You have no idea what it is. And so now when you're realizing some of your biggest fears on stage, it can be like this out of body experience. But, I've just learned nobody really knows what the choreography is supposed to be. So literally faking it, acting like this is all part of the plan, and adopting that to my life when, even like, I think for us starting this podcast, I wasn't sure that we could do it. I was like, me have a podcast? Can I really do that? Same kind of thing. But then realizing, of course we can. We can do this. You just gotta kind of like, I started to think of myself as a podcaster, and here we are. So I know that it's that kind of thinking has definitely worked for me.
Those are some beautiful stories. I think the point that I take away from it is that once you commit and you're involved, then it takes on a dynamic of its own. It's when you stand back and you're waiting, in a sense, to go on stage. That's when the self-doubt comes. It's when you commit and you're taking action that suddenly then you're aligning yourself with the forces of nature. You're, as you say, surrendering, you're giving yourself over to what is being presented at that moment. And that energizes you and gives you confidence, and in a way breaks down the limitations that once you're involved, it all seems to become much easier. It's when we perhaps overthink the situation, that in those quiet moments alone, we're having all these thoughts. And I think, you probably know about the happy ending effect. Do you know about that in psychology, where, we only do things which we consider will have a happy result. We find it easier to do those things, even if we've never done them before. And so, that's obviously based on what's happened in the past, how we've been conditioned, our cultural environment, and so on and so forth. But it just came to mind because recently there were some Cambridge scientists who've discovered that there are competing parts of the brain which make this decision, because we're more likely to make a decision based on past experiences rather than a rational analysis. And so if you've been on stage and had a painful experience, or if you've been competing in a race and it didn't work out well, there's more effort required to turn that around and get the positive juice out of it and say, okay, well, that was a one-off. We're just going to commit now and forget about that. Let's just go now.
Yeah. Sorry,
Go
Derrick.
ahead, Rory.
The other part I really like about the fake it till you make it is, I've studied NLP before, and they have this idea of modeling. You model excellence. So you go, okay, who's really good at this, or who looks confident, or whatever thing that you're lacking, who's a good public speaker? And then they use that phrase, use as if, like act as if you had that skill, act as if you were that person. Because, these behaviors and these actions, they all exist in the world, and we're just picking the parts that we want. And it is, fake it till you make it. It's just you're giving yourself the permission to take up that role by, you kind of trick yourself into it by going, well, I'm not that, but I'm going to act as if I am it, which gives you permission to fake it. And, you only have to fake it once, and then you are it. We are podcasters,
Exactly.
As soon as you do it, you are it. Like Anthony was saying, you take that action and then it becomes real.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I was also trying to make that bridge from being a dancer into a choreographer. And my dance career had a good history, but as a choreographer, I didn't have all this stuff. But then again, too, I was like, if you want to be looked at as a choreographer, you have to start calling yourself one. You have to start talking as if you are one. And then you're going to have that experience. You're going to realize that. And it's just interesting, I think, what we don't always see or know is that there are a lot of performers who have stage fright. They're deathly afraid of going on stage, but they do it. And I can't remember who it was exactly, but I think in the book, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, it talks about a performer, I think he sings opera, who was deathly afraid of getting on stage, and he would talk about the little me. And his therapist would kind of help him have this conversation, telling the little me to sit down. The big me wants to get on stage and sing. So again, this internal me that's there needs to be given permission to do this thing and get the little me out of the way. It's so fascinating when you think about it. But Rory, why don't you share with us your story?
Okay. So I've mentioned my journalism career recently, and this story comes about when I had a career change from journalism to becoming a product manager. And it was in the first few months, and I was really struggling with one of the aspects of the job. And as a journalist, I'd worked with words and ideas, and I'd become very comfortable in that arena. But as a product manager, I had to kind of expand my expertise to some other areas. So product managers in web development work with web designers and web developers to develop websites. And one of the aspects of the job that I was struggling with was giving feedback on designs. So what would happen is, with my boss and one of the other stakeholders, we would gather behind a designer's computer and, stroke our chins and thoughtfully offer feedback on these web page designs. And this is something that I really struggled with because I had a limiting belief that I wasn't qualified to talk about visual design because I'm colorblind. So this belief had embedded itself with me from an early age. So when I was 14, I was given the standard colorblind test where there are all these dots on a grid, and there's a number written in that grid. I don't know if you've done this test, in a shade of color. And if you can't read certain of the colors, you're called colorblind. And this doesn't mean that I only see in black and white, as almost all of my friends would say. It just means that I struggle to distinguish certain colors on the red-green spectrum. And for context, 1 in 12 men have this issue, but only 1 in 200 women. So get your women friends to help you decorate. But this didn't seem like too big a deal at the time because I was more into music than art. But the nurse did say that I would never be an astronaut, which as a Brit in the 90s, when there weren't any, didn't really make a difference. But yeah, and the belief that I was no good at visual art had been embedded even earlier than that, because at primary school, once we were preparing for the school play and I was on set design duty, and I remember I'd been colouring in something on the backdrop, and the teacher had come over all flustered and kind of pulled me away from the backdrop and she told me off for using the wrong colour. I don't know what I'd been doing, because I'm good with primary colours. She said, you're not good at that, you should work on something else. So 30 years later, I'm standing behind this designer's desk, petrified to give any design feedback, because I'm like, oh no, I'm unqualified to do this. It's gonna be exposed that I don't know the difference between a greeny red and a reddy green. But then I went on this NLP course, and one of the things we covered was limiting beliefs. And I'd realized that I'd let this one aspect of not being able to perceive subtle differences in shades of color on the red-green spectrum affect my whole belief in my ability to comment on everything visual. So with this knowledge, I went back into the design reviews with a much more accurate understanding of my capabilities. So shades of color play, a very small part in most web designs outside of the branding. And there were so many other things I could comfortably and confidently talk about, like the layout, the fonts, the size and shape of things, the imagery, the padding, the general functionality and user experience. And it was so freeing not to have this one small limitation affect this reasonably large aspect of my job. And, then I was giving so much feedback that the designers were like, no, get back in your box. But yeah, there's this famous quote from Henry Ford that says, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And, that's the whole crux of these limiting beliefs. You have a belief that limits your ability or willingness to play in a certain area. But what you find when you examine these things more closely is that they're often based on nothing more than fear or fear of failure. And if they are based in fact, like my colorblindness was, the impact is often a lot less than we think.
I love these conversations because I feel like I learned so much about the two of you. I had no idea you were colorblind.
I never say what color shirt should we wear this season. I'm not getting involved in that conversation.
I'm just curious. I'm curious because I've seen the videos, like, guys or young boys who are colorblind they have these glasses that you can put on and they can see color. Have you had that experience?
No, I haven't, but I Googled a colorblindness test when I was writing this just to see, because I couldn't remember what color spectrum it was. And the site that I was on was at one of those glasses sites. And I was like, hey, Susie, look, I could get these weird colored glasses. And then I could be like, no, pass me the green towel, and I'd be correct.
Wow.
But yeah, it's like such a small area of life. Like things look normal to me. And it's weird, I guess, because I was like, should they call it color blindness? Because, most people interpret that as you see in black and white. And I think on the website it did say brackets, color, something deficiency. So they've tried to rebrand it. But it's one of those things where you start thinking, there's something wrong with me. And then, that expands into something. And it's so minor, like they could just keep it if you want to become a pilot, it's part of the pilot test. There's no need for people to know it in a way that will mean they go, right, I'm going to stay completely away from anything visual.
Well, I think your story is so interesting, though, too, because of the example that you gave with the teacher. I kind of feel like you could have maybe you had a color blindness test and it tells you one thing, but then you have an experience with someone when color is involved to maybe either underscore that or highlight that. So you kind of go, oh, maybe it really is true. You know what I mean? So I can definitely understand your reluctance to be giving feedback in this setting that you're describing, because maybe you've had some evidence that maybe you don't have the ability to comment on color. But I love how that's not the end of the story. There's all these other things, the visual aspect of it, that you can comment on. And because your ability to maybe not detect the subtleties, so what? That's the brilliant thing.
And you let I let that small thing take over this huge area, and people do it all the time. So they might say, I was no good at for example, some specific sport at school, and then you go, right, I'm no good at all sport. You know, people do it. So I think what meditation helps do is, well, one, it removes the fear, because my issue in that design review is that I feared looking stupid. You know, it's that fear of touching those boundaries. So I think what meditation does is it reduces that fear, so you're more likely to push the boundaries and examine them. And also you get more awareness to kind of step, you know, onto a higher ledge and have a look more with a look with some greater perspective. Because it was interesting this year, that it was a huge year for me. Like, I changed careers, I learned to meditate, and I did this NLP course, and all these changes all happening at once. And it was it was 2014. It was like, yeah, this is my year. But you don't kind of notice these things till after. I was just like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this.
I think it's interesting. What you're talking about is that, in a sense, you know, I think what we're all talking about is that something happens, and it's the formation of a sort of cognitive bias. You know, from that moment onwards, that's the label, that's the condition that we're going to kind of live under. And that determines, in a sense, it's like a pair of glasses, that, you know, we view everything through that prism, through that lens. And as you say, you know, you'll avert from getting involved in things that you feel you're not good at, and you'll go towards the things that you feel that you are good at. And I think, yes, fear is involved. I think ego is involved as well. You know, we don't want to look foolish. You know, why are you doing something with the possibility of failure when you know that in the past you have failed and it hasn't worked out? Why are you putting yourself up for that again? And I think you're right. It's the removal of fear that, you know, we become more assured of our capabilities. And, you know, this is incremental. It's tiny, tiny little baby steps in all sorts of areas of our life. And, you know, as you say, Derrick, you know, putting together a podcast, you know, a year ago, we would have all just laughed at each other and said, you're crazy. And here we are into series 2. And so I think, you know, it's those tiny steps. It's those tiny steps, and just building up the confidence, removing the fear, putting the ego to one side, and addressing that cognitive bias. You know, the anchor points which are kind of holding you back. It's a little bit like in sailing. You know, you have a thing called a storm anchor, which you throw overboard, which is kind of there to stabilize you, to kind of stop you from blowing around all over the place, in a sense, stopping you from moving. And we've all got these storm anchors that we need to kind of cut loose from to allow ourselves to move forward in any direction that we want. And of course, it's incredibly liberating, and it's very exciting, because then you realize, well, there are all these things that I thought were impossible, but now I can do. I mean, just last week, there was a guy who managed to climb Everest without, you know, he hasn't got any legs. He's the first double amputee who climbed Everest.
Wow.
And when he was asked why he did it, he said, because I just wanted to prove that I can. You know, I didn't want to have the physical limitation. You know, let's just go out and see if it works, see if I can do this. And it's fantastic what people can do when they put their mind to it. And I think, you know, sometimes you have to be what we would describe as bloody minded. You know, you have to be single minded. You have to be just, to hell with everybody else, to hell with everything else. This is what I'm going to do. And yes, I'm going to fall over, but I'm going to pick myself up, and I'm just going to keep doing it. I'm just going to keep doing it until it all falls into place. And then, you know, you'll probably find there are people in the wings or on the sidelines, you know, cheering you on, because they see that you're so plucky, that you've got so much courage, that you are just determined to. You're not doing it in a showy way. You're just quietly getting on with it, but you are getting on with it and not standing still. And that's such an important point from a meditation point of view, that, you know, we want to evolve. We don't want to stay stationary. We don't want to stay stuck. We don't want to be forever in the, you know, caught in the ever repeating known. We want to keep moving forward.
I know that I definitely have had meditation experiences where I found myself limitless, touching this idea of that I am everything at once and how grand that is. And I think, I feel like in some ways, sometimes I'm trying to rid myself of the limiting beliefs, and other times I'm trying to accept that because I understand that I am limitless. But just in this experience that I'm having as a human, sometimes there are limitations, and I'm okay with that because I recognize these other unlimited things that I'd never really given credence to before because I was so focused on this thing that I couldn't do, where now it's like, I don't even know how important that is, where once you have that taste of the limitless you. So if I can't do this particular and I think it starts to, without me even recognizing it, those limiting beliefs start to unwind a bit as well. And then you forget that you have them, or until you're being challenged with them, you're like, oh yeah, I would, a year ago, I would not have done that at all. And that's the beauty of our practice is, it keeps reinforcing this idea of all possibilities. Anything you want to happen can happen. The limits that you see are of your imagination. You're creating that, so you can uncreate that, or you can create whatever you want. And I think it's just really important to, but I think that's about consistency. If you're meditating here and there, you're getting great benefits, obviously. But I know when I was consistently having that experience of limitlessness, that makes a much bigger difference than the sometimes here, sometimes there approach to meditating. And that's why I think all three of us are proponents of consistent practice. It's a different thing altogether.
Yeah. Consistently connecting with that field of unlimited potential means that you're a lot more likely in the day-to-day world to go, actually, maybe I can do that. But I think it's also important to qualify the difference between limiting beliefs and just normal limitations. Like a limiting belief, as you said, Derrick, you can get rid of it in 5 seconds. Like I got rid of my limiting belief around visual design in 5 seconds. It's just a belief. But yeah, it doesn't mean that we have to force ourselves to do things where we're not naturally skilled at them. So like I got rid of my limiting belief around visual design, but I'm not going to become an artist. I'm not going to make it my main thing. But it just means that those roadblocks kind of fall around you, and I'm still going to stick to my strengths. But it means that I have fewer barriers hanging around. But speaking of meditation, so many of my students come with that limiting belief of my mind is too busy to meditate. The old classic, and it's that's all about the expectation. What is your expectation of meditation? And if it is, I'm going to have a completely clear mind with no thoughts in it, then you're not going to be able to do that. No one can do that. Most people can't do that. It's about going, okay, I'm changing my expectation here to, if I sit down and follow the process and go back to my mantra every time, then over time I'll have fewer of those thoughts and I'll connect more with this bigger version of myself, and my fear will gradually dissolve, and I will become happier because I'm giving my body time to process all this stuff that's gone in. And I love that natural process of it. It's like these little fears dissolve over time, and it's not like I'm going, right, I want to, my classic ones are my fear of heights that has gone, and my fear of public speaking. I've never thought about them in meditation. I've never sat down and gone, right, today is the heights day. But that's just general fear that happened to express itself for me in heights and public speaking. Most people fear public speaking, but they just dissolve over time when we do the work, like you were saying, Anthony, when we sit down and do it day after day, not worrying about the outcome, doing the process. You get all these benefits by acting as if you're a meditator. Sit down and meditate as if you're a meditator, and then you are a meditator. It's as simple as that. There's no particular result that you're aiming at. You do the work and you'll get the benefits.
Okay, thanks for sticking around until the end. Each episode, we offer a takeaway in the form of an exercise you can do at home to start applying this knowledge in your own life. This episode, we were talking about limiting beliefs and how by letting go of our rigid attachment to accomplishing a goal, along with modeling the type of behavior we seek to possess by adopting the fake it till you make it attitude, we were able to overcome the beliefs that once limited our abilities. And you can do the same. What limiting belief do you currently hold about yourself? Keeping that in mind, give yourself permission to let go of the outcome and participate in action that models the behavior you desire. Believe in your ability and act as if you already possess that which you seek. After running this experiment, we invite you to take a few moments and write down your experience. You can do so in a journal, on a scrap of paper, or even just into your phone. If you're happy to share your story, we'd love for you to join the conversation. And for those of you who are not camera shy, please feel free to share a video journal of your story with us. You can send them via email to stories@thevediconversation.com or simply post them on social media with the hashtag #TheVedicConversation. And if you found value in this episode, please share it with your audience and consider giving us a positive review to help others find us. Thank you. And please take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.